Preservation Board in the Cultural Resources Office. She'll be replacing Adana, and we want to welcome her to her first Preservation Board meeting today.
Welcome.
Thank you, Richard.
Is that the announcement?
That's the announcement.
Very exciting. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. This meeting of the Preservation Board is now in order. I'm going to call a roll to reassure myself and those of you following along at home who's present. Commissioner Fathman, are you here? Commissioner Hamilton, are you here?
Here.
Commissioner Killeen, are you here?
Here.
Commissioner Richardson, are you here?
Here.
Commissioner Robinson, are you here? Commissioner Vines, are you here?
Here.
Alderman Coder, are you here? Okay, and I am present. I count 5 commissioners answering aye. Commissioners who are present, has anybody read the minutes from August 24th, 2020? And if you have, do you have a motion? Okay, I hear no motion regarding the minutes, so they are not approved. Calling agenda item A, which is Jules Street. Who's speaking?
Stephanie Moore, the Cultural Resources Office.
Great, proceed.
All right. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So this is a preliminary review for new construction of a single-family home at 2224 to 2226 Jules Avenue, or Jules Street, excuse me. Here is the lot, and the owner is also the architect, Kevin Logan, and he has chosen to go through the compatible new construction policy for new construction. And in doing so, he has met with the Cultural Resources Office as well as the neighborhood several times to discuss his plans. He's also incorporated a majority of the comments into his revised plans. And he has completed all of the necessary steps to bring his preliminary review before the Preservation Board. And these are the lots, 2224 to 2226 Jules Street, where the new construction will be. And as you can see, the houses to the north do not fully line up parallel to the street. And then the house to the south sits right off the street. So there is a variety of setbacks on Jules if you look across the street and then also to the houses on either side of the property. And this new construction is actually in McKinley Heights Historic District. And because of that, the compatible new construction policy also takes into account the standards for new construction in each district. So the McKinley Heights District requires a model example. And from the model example, they base their design off of that to make it compatible with not only the model example, but also the historic buildings surrounding. The model example that Mr. Logan has chosen is located at 2258 Jules Street. It's on the same street as the new property. And as you can see, it was constructed in 1901, and it is a brick 2.5-story 3-bay 2-family building with recessed entry. It does have an elaborate cornice and a gabled front dormer. So it does meet the McKinley Heights standards for a model example, although the current design complies in most elements. The lack of a cornice feature deviates from this. And the Cultural Resources staff therefore recommends that the new building incorporate a decorative and/or projecting element at the front eave line that references not only the model example, but also the historic buildings along the street. And we'll get a better sense of that when we look at the design for the new building. And then this is the brick color chosen for the new construction. As you can see, this building here is existing on Ann. It's 2018 Ann. And the color that they have chosen for their new construction is Meridian brick in the color Domino. And this picture was taken to show the compatibility in colors. The original building, it does have a little bit differentiation. It has some red, whereas the Domino brick does not, but it was determined by the Cultural Resources Office that the colors were close enough to be considered compatible. And per the requirements, a building does have to be, if the color is going to be a non-traditional color, then the building must be within a four-block radius of the construction site, and it must be a contributing building, which this building is. All right. And then per the compatible new construction policy, there are two categories that it's divided into. The first being the required compatibility, and that falls in line with the standards for new construction in McKinley Heights. And then also the allowed differentiation. So first, we will go through the required compatibility. And there is a lot of this, so I'm going to go through and tell you what complies and what doesn't. So for required compatibility, the height has to be within 2 feet of the building surrounding. I'm actually going to go through a little bit to get down to this. Here we go. And it does comply. And then there's also the massing, so that's how wide the building is. It is slightly wider than within the 2 to 3 feet allowable for the massing for the buildings on either side. But given that it is such a wide lot, the Cultural Resources Office is content with the massing of this building. And then as far as setback and block space, given that there is such a variety of a setback, Mr. Logan has chosen to make his placement, here I'll go up a little bit, sorry, my slides are a little bit out of order. Here we go. Here's his setback. His setback was chosen to be made halfway between the building to the north and the building to the south, which sits right up against the street. So in that sense, he also complies. And then for street-facing facade composition, which would be here, he also complies. And then for windows and doors, the door opening shall relate to interior and exterior patterns of use. The main entrance shall be placed in the street facade or on the side facade near the front corner of the building, and it does comply here. As you can see, there are windows over on the right bay, the third bay that has double windows, and the model example does not. But that is something that is part of his allowed differentiation, which we will discuss in the next section. So then next, there are materials on the street visible facade. It does not completely comply with this because although the front and secondary facades are brick, there is a two-car garage attached at the rear, which you can see over here to the left of the door, that does stick out and is visible from the street. It will extend 3 feet 10 inches beyond the wall on the north, and it will be prominently visible from the street. The material currently proposed for the front-facing element of the garage is a composite siding, as is the dormer. The Cultural Resources Office recommends that this wall of the garage be also faced in brick for consistency with the surrounding historic building. In addition, it has been the policy of the Cultural Resources Office in historic districts where a new garage or other ancillary structure could not be hidden behind the main structure, that it be brick when it's visible from the street. So again, we are just asking that this element also be faced in brick instead of the composite siding. But as you can see here, the siding on the dormer is allowed because historically dormers would have had wood siding, so the Cultural Resources Office is okay with that. And then it also complies with solar panels, the mechanical units, the ancillary buildings. It's not applicable because the garage is actually attached to the building and visible from the street, and it complies with site. So then we get to the second section that it's broken into, and that is the allowed differentiation. And those are material, color, fenestration, and percent of solid to void. You are allowed to have only 2 elements of these 4 that differentiate from your model example. And the 2 that Mr. Logan has chosen would be color and fenestration. But as for material, the Cultural Resources Office says that it partially complies because the primary and secondary facades are brick with 2 exceptions, that being the garage and also the dormer, which will be that composite siding. And again, we are recommending brick for that garage section. And then also the color. This is where the brick color comes in, like I said. This is part of his allowed differentiation. When a non-traditional brick color has been selected, it has to be found in an existing building within 4 blocks in 2018 and is within 4 blocks, and therefore his color is allowed under his differentiation. And then we have fenestration. That is where his double windows come into play here on this third bay. So his allowed differentiation is that because the proposed design features paired windows on that first and second floor, and that feature is not found on the model example or on any of the houses along the street. And then he also complies with percent of solid to void. All right, and then based on these preliminary findings, the Cultural Resources Office recommends that the Preservation Board grant preliminary approval to the proposed new construction of a single-family home at 2224 to 2226 Jewel Street, with the stipulation that the street-facing facade of the rear garage be brick, the design of the front elevation incorporate a cornice element, and with the stipulation that final drawings, details, and exterior materials be reviewed and approved by the Cultural Resources Office.
Commissioners, are there questions for Ms. Moore? Commissioner Colleen?
So would it be possible, Bethany, to see the model example again, please?
Yes.
So fenestration-wise, you're also not enforcing the arched windows on the second floor, or are you?
No.
So there's a third differentiation. And then the fourth differentiation, there's no gable on this new design.
There is a gable on this front, and he has it on the side.
So that's 4 differentiations, right?
We were not counting that as a differentiation since the model example does have a gable.
Well, it clearly is another differentiation. So can we go back to the design, please?
Sure.
And then the 5th differentiation, there are no basement windows. So I don't see how this thing really relates to that model example at all. Would be my question, I guess.
We were taking the model example as kind of like Dan describes it as getting the box right. It's not complete replication. And that's what the construction policy allows for.
All right, thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions? Okay, I don't see any. If I can't see you and you're a commissioner and you want to say something, speak up. Okay, good enough. Let's hear from the applicant. That'd be the Logans, one or both. Hello, welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
How are you?
We don't know yet.
So just to give you a little history, this is my wife, Juanita, and I'm Kevin Logan. we've been looking at we've owned this site for over a year, and I've been designing this house for my family for the last, probably the last 8 or 9 months. And this is for a new home for us to move from Benton Park to the McKinley Heights neighborhood. What really drew us to the site was on this particular street, Jules Street. If you look at it, there's varying designs of homes on there. You know, if you know McKinley Heights, there's pretty much a vernacular that is established in the neighborhood that's pretty consistent throughout. But on this particular street, there's a lot of variation in design and setbacks, as you saw, and even heights of the buildings. And that's what drew us to the site. So when we looked at designing a house for ourselves, you know, I wanted to do something a little more contemporary, but that would be compatible with the neighborhood. So after discussion back and forth, you know, with my wife and I came up with a design that we ended up sharing with the neighborhood association and cultural resources. And I think we settled in on a plan that was, and you know, I know we're supposed to use a model example, but this was more so to use for a contemporary, to fit a contemporary design within this existing neighborhood. So that was the reason for the use of the model example. It was just to sort of give us an idea of something that we can base it off of, but we knew that we were going to do something a little different. You know, my sort of general thought process is if we're going to design a new building in this day and age in 2020 in a neighborhood that was, you know, being built in the early 1900s, that we should try and fit in, but also be different, you know. So we want to be compatible and fit within the neighborhood as far as scale and what have you, and materiality. But we wanted to also let it be known that, you know, we're building something that is built in today's era. And that was the reason why I wanted to do brick all the way around on the main house. And then when you get to the garage, I kind of created this as 2 volumes. You know, there's the main house and then there's the garage volume. The garage volume, I differentiated that with the hardy siding. And that's the reason for the selection of hardy instead of brick in that area. Now, I understand that is the requirement from CRO, but I was looking at it from a contemporary design standpoint, and from the separation of 2 volumes, that it actually, from an architectural standpoint, it makes sense to differentiate those 2 materials. So, and I understand the thought process behind it was, you know, the idea of that requirement was if I had like sort of a long 10-foot facade that was clearly visible, that, you know, that was the reason why you wanted to see brick. But this little 3'10" area just frames my stairwell down into my basement patio. And it's just a small sliver that is literally about 80 feet back from the street. So it's nowhere near the front facade. If it was much closer, then I would truly understand that being brick. But since it's so far back, I wanted to, you know, I thought it would be okay for it to, once again, be differentiated with a separate material, the hardy siding. And I thought also, as you see in this elevation that's put up, it also helps differentiate the 2 volumes. There's the 1-story volume of the garage and then the 2-story main mass of the main house. And then as far as the cornice details and things like that, once again, I was looking for more contemporary design. I wasn't trying to replicate what was going on in the neighborhood in the model house. I was trying to just sort of make this sort of a clean interpretation that would be compatible with the neighborhood, but not necessarily, you know, replicate what was already there. You know, I'm trying to do, once again, a more contemporary interpretation. And so that was my sort of thought process there. I also, you know, this is a very wide lot, so I situated more to the north, once again, so that I could take advantage of 2 separate yards, if you will. But if you would, as you see it positioned, if you go to the site plan, you'll see that there's also the opportunity that maybe somewhere down the road in the future, there could be another infill home built somewhere along down the line, you know, maybe when we retire or something of that nature. And so as you see on that side lot to the south, there's the potential for future development, maybe. But other than that, on the two things that the CRO and I sort of differentiate, I think it has more to do with the overall design of the house. It was a more contemporary interpretation. It wasn't a replication that I was shooting for. And when I talked with the neighborhood association, they were in full support of it. And they appreciated that design versus trying to replicate what were there, because that's not what we were trying to achieve. Do you have anything else you want to add, Juanita?
No, that's it.
So I think that's pretty much all I have to say right now. If there's any questions, I can answer any questions you may have about the design.
Now, don't challenge us like that. We may not be off topic. We could ask you any kind of question.
Okay.
However, let's see if commissioners have questions about this particular project. Are there commissioners who do? Commissioner Killeen?
Do you have a letter of support from the neighborhood and the alderman?
Yes, sir.
I have a letter that I was going to read from the Neighborhood Association. I forgot to read earlier, if you guys would like to hear that now.
Sure.
Okay. This is from the McKinley Heights Neighborhood Association. 2224 to 2226, Jules resides on the 2200 block of Jules, which possesses a variation of residential buildings, masses, fenestrations, and levels, combined with multiple periods of architecture representing 141 years of design. The proposed, a modern residential building design allowed by McKinley Heights standards, is an unobtrusive response to the specific context of this block. It is honest in its design, as it does not attempt to replicate, imitate, or compete with past architectural periods and their details. The proposed siding, fenestration, roof, and materiality is a modern blend and a mindful interpretation. The proposed has two deviations from the Cultural Resources new construction policy that are acceptable. Number one, a 3-foot 10-inch portion of the garage visible from the street, which is required by the McKinley Heights standards, to be faced with brick, while the rest of the garage can be faced with a different material. This theatrical staging, peddled by some historic codes, appears odd and fake and is a sad relic from over a decade ago, when property values in our district were a quarter of their current value. The 3-foot 10-inch bump is insignificant given the color is a shade of the brick and that it sits 77 feet away from the sidewalk. A decorative cornice is not found atop the public facade or any other facade which respects the historic buildings by not competing or needlessly imitating the decorative common in their period of architecture. The proposed has one deviation from McKinley Heights standards that is not acceptable. The fence is designed with pickets laid horizontally around the perimeter of the property. McKinley Heights standards call for dog-eared pickets laid vertically. The site extends about 85 feet on the Jules Avenue side, and the fence is designed to be less than 60 feet long in total. Although a horizontal fence is a modern design common in this period of modern architecture, the proposed fence dominates the landscape and not only detracts from the proposed building itself, but it severs the design goal of being modern but also historically compatible. Regards, Rocco Dana, head of development for McKinley Heights Neighborhood Association.
Thank you. No further questions.
Was there a communication from the alderman as well? Bethany?
Oh, go ahead.
Bethany?
Can you say that again?
Was there a communication from the alderman?
No.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Dan says yes.
Okay. If you all decide whether it's yes or no, let's hear what it is.
Alderman Jack Coder, I believe, sent a message supporting the neighborhood position in this case.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sure he did, matter of fact.
Okay, commissioners, you have questions of the applicant? Fine. Who's signed up to speak, Bethany?
Rocco Dana is next.
Rocco, do you have anything to add to your comment?
Yes, thank you, Richard. I just want to clarify something. Kevin, is the fence still in the design? horizontally?
No,
Yeah.
I'm fine with it being vertical. I have no issue with that.
Great, great. And yeah, we talked about that earlier, and thanks for compromising on that. That's great. You know, this is exactly the type of building that is allowed by our standards. This is what we want. We see the value of having modern buildings that do not compete or try to imitate historic buildings as a way of respecting them as one is much different than the other, and one should not be in some sort of competition or create some sort of fake replication. So this building is a great example of the direction that we decided many years ago in our code, and that the direction that we continue to have for our neighborhood. And this has been a great experience with Kevin and Juanita. Really enjoyed it, talking to a fellow designer, and you know, I'm excited to have them as neighbors as well. So, thank you.
Great, Bethany, who else?
Next, we have Jim Sonamaker.
Proceed.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I look at this as, if it's not the letter of the law, it certainly is the spirit. I agree with Rocco that this will enhance the streetscape and bring us forward into this century. Thank you.
There's no one else on the list to speak. Richard, you're muted.
Thank you. Commissioner Richardson, have you got a motion?
I move that the Preservation Board grant preliminary approval to the proposed construction with the stipulation that the primary facade of the garage be brick and that the design incorporate a front cornice element, and that the final drawings, details, and exterior materials be reviewed by staff.
Second.
A second.
Motion made and seconded twice.
High five, Randy.
Discussion? Commissioners? Commissioner Killeen?
Well, I respect what the neighborhood officials have to say about this design, and certainly applaud the owners for their hard work in building their dream home. But I just feel like McKinleyites with this move is opening the door for just about anything to be built over there. I count no less than 7 deviations from their code on this design. And so I'm wondering, is their historic code still in place after a project like this? I mean, it's a nice house, but it doesn't really relate to that model example as far as I'm concerned. So
I think if we have support from the neighborhood and aldermen, and they're saying this is the direction they want to go in, and they feel it fits, I see why not. My opinion.
Well, and their ordinance says that it's not meant to preclude contemporary design. So the model example, as the staff said, is supposed to be the basis from which to kind of draw inspiration from. So this isn't like similar districts that require strict adherence. For example, it's more for compatibility and a basis for drawing inspiration.
Commissioner Robinson, your designs are pretty deviant. you have anything to add to this discussion?
Why do my designs have to be deviant? You know, divergent, but deviant. No, I mean, I believe, honestly, since the standard says that it, you know, in no way is trying to preclude contemporary design, you know, really, I'm like, why do we have a model example to begin with? I mean, because I think that the two are conflicting. I mean, and especially based on,
Anthony?
Did we lose him?
I think we lost them.
Oh, I think we did.
May I chime in for just a second? You guys hear me okay? Okay. I think it's a really attractive design. I think it is a great merger of historic elements and contemporary design in a way that just, you know, meshes really well. I think it's consistent with the kind of the dynamic activity that's going on in Fox Park, and especially if the neighborhood association is behind it, I think that is kind of telling. And this is a project that I would support.
Bethany, you're not a commissioner, but you put a lot of work into this project. You have anything you want to add?
I just wanted to add that he did fulfill the requirements necessary in the steps to bring it to this place, and the Cultural Resources Office does stand behind our recommendation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Commissioners, there's a motion on the floor that's been made and seconded. I'm going to call a roll. Commissioner Vines, do you vote yes or no on the motion?
Yes.
Commissioner Robinson, do you vote yes or no on the motion? We'll pass him. Commissioner Richardson, do you vote yes or no on the motion?
Yes.
Commissioner Killeen, do you vote yes or no on the motion?
No.
Commissioner Hamilton, do you vote yes or no on the motion?
Yes.
Commissioner Robinson, do you vote yes or no on the motion? Record Commissioner Robinson as not voting. Record me as abstaining. The motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, let's do agenda item B, the Lafayette Square Historic District Standards Revisions. Logans, you can stay or go. It's up to you. If you stay, we're going to make you speak. Your choice, though. Congratulations.
Good afternoon, everyone. The next agenda item is consideration of new standard or a revision to the Lafayette Square Historic District Code. And we will scroll as we have learned how. There we go. Okay. All right, very good. So this is a very modest amendment to the Lafayette Square Code. As you all will probably remember, a little more than a year ago, the Lafayette Square standards were revised in a significant way, particularly with an eye towards changes in the northwest quadrant of the neighborhood, which is kind of, if people can see the cursor, is generally the area that the arrow is going in right now. And the code contemplates three levels of sort of rigor within its standards. The first is historic infill sites. Those are sites in which a building is constructed kind of cheek by jowl generally with other historic structures. And per the conversation we just had about what a model example means, in Lafayette Square, the model example has been typically interpreted to mean a building that has a lot of replication to it. And the Lafayette Square folks have been particularly concerned regarding the treatment of the back of the buildings and wanting to see the finished material, usually brick, as the material on the entire back. The second tier, which you see on your screen here, is new construction on large sites with historic context. And those are just a few sites in the neighborhood. One was right here. You'll recall the Adewamni brothers did a project that got preliminary review approval. The other was where the letter A appears. And at those sites, a model example is required, but there's more latitude around that model example. And then finally, the third category is new construction on large sites with little or no historic context. That is this cross-hatched area over near Shoto up towards Jefferson. And there are somewhat minimal standards, I would say, just to ensure some level of compatibility, because in that area there are hardly any historic structures whatsoever. You will also recall, board, that you heard a project from the developer Jeff Winserling last fall, winter. And Jeff proposed to redevelop what's labeled as A on the map. We had quite a rigorous hearing that day about the pluses and minuses of Jeff's design, depending on which side of the fence folks sat on. But that project got preliminary approval. And after that happened, I was in communication with the Lafayette Square neighborhood representatives, and they expressed that, and they said this to you at the board meeting that we had regarding that subject, that their sort of meaning in what the standards were supposed to say and how we were all interpreting them did not line up with their expectations. So in light of that, they have proposed a very basic kind of modification to their standards. And they want to take two parcels in the neighborhood, and they want to change those from being in the new construction with on large sites with historic context to being historic infill sites. So those sites would be required to have more of a replication of a historic model example and not just be loosely based on a model example. So with that said, I'd like to take a moment just to show you the locations we're talking about. So this is Hickory between Missouri and McKay. Missouri is in the foreground and McKay is in the background. This is the site that Jeff Winserling is working to redevelop. Jeff did a preliminary review. The preliminary reviews are good for 2 years. Jeff has a very large site. I have indicated to Jeff that as long as he is up and going within 2 years and making progress, that preliminary review will be honored. The neighborhood is concerned that if Jeff doesn't build his project, and another developer takes over the site, they would like a more rigorous review standard. And I apologize, Suzanne, if I'm putting words in your mouth, but you'll get to correct me soon enough. Here are a couple of images of that site that Jeff Winserling is developing. And then here are some context pictures. So along McKay in Missouri, there are historic buildings that the new architecture would need to relate to. You can see on the right side of your screen, I hope it's on the right for you, is the west side of West on Missouri Avenue. And so there's historic buildings there. Directly across the street from these buildings, there are almost no historic structures. And you can sort of see that there are these white vinyl, I think they're vinyl-sided structures built in the 80s. And then there are some, I think, very handsome brick townhouses that to the untrained eye might look like historic buildings, but if you look at the foundations, they're poured concrete and they are not historic. So directly across the street from here, there isn't context, but on the ends there is. And here's the other end I'm going to show you now. This is, on the right is the other side of Hickory Street, on the other side of the Winserling development site. And on the left is buildings on Missouri, or McKay rather, I'm sorry. And we're looking, from this angle, we are looking south towards Well, yes, we're looking south towards Lafayette Square Park if you go off in the distance far enough. So that's one of the sites we're talking about. The other site is one on Mississippi. So what you see in these two pictures is a vacant yard of grass with some cars parked behind it. To the right in both pictures are a group of townhouses called the Mississippi Walk development. This development happened some time ago. I know that because I wasn't around when it did. The neighborhood folks, I think, are wanting to see a better replication of a model example over there as well. So that's why they're proposing changing these two designations. And now I've got some context around there. So again, on the left, you see that Mississippi Walk development with those attached townhomes. And then across the street from there, so this will be just to the, get my bearings here. This will be just to the south. The picture on the right, on the opposite, is just to the south of, oh, I'm blanking on the name of the restaurant, is the restaurant at the corner of Mississippi and Shoto. And these are historic structures, and they're really, you know, very wonderful, typical kind of Lafayette Square architecture. So that's the last visuals I have. Both Alderman Jack Coder and Alderwoman Christine Ingracia have been in the loop on these changes. I have support letters from both of them as well, and I believe Alderwoman Ingracia is on the call with us today. And with that, I will say that the Cultural Resources Office is also recommending support for these changes, and I will take any questions you may have.
Tiffany, was that a question?
No.
It looked like a question.
It was a really big yawn.
Okay.
Yeah, this is.
I'm not yawning at your presentation, Dan. Okay.
Dan, who owns those two parcels?
I can't even look disgusted.
Dan Kresnoff, who owns those two parcels?
The parcel on Hickory is owned by Jeff Winterling. The parcel on Mississippi is owned by the Mississippi Walk folks. They have both been informed of this change, and Suzanne Sessions has been more in touch with the Mississippi Walk folks particularly, so she may be able to speak to the interaction with them a little better than I can.
Okay, Suzanne, let's hear from you. Nope, not yet. You're still muted, Suzanne. There you go.
Yes.
Okay, go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Preservation Board and Cultural Resource, for listening to this one more time. I want to thank you all for supporting the 2019 Lafayette Square Historic Standards. You know, we spent 5 months talking to the neighborhood, refining and editing and meeting with Cultural Resource Office. And you know, we, the committee, thought we had addressed all the necessary changes and additions for this new development to our neighborhood. But we were wrong. And you said back in October that we were ambiguous in our code. So what was missing was, we see now, a clarification of figure 22, the map. And I guess, can you bring that up again? If not, I will speak of it, which is the new construction standards for potential developable properties, and substituting infill, we want, for new construction with historic context in these two properties, A and B. The 2200 block of Hickory, and that's the highlighted in red A, and the 1000 block of Mississippi, and that's an undeveloped lot, B. And we also need to ask to change section 304 and 304.1 to now read residential and now non-residential new construction, which distinguishes 3 categories of building standards, not the earlier 2. Presently, there's only one all residential infill planned for this new Shoto development. The rest are all mixed use or high large site construction. And because of it being all residential, is always meant to fall within the historic infill, meaning a historic model example is required. The phasing on the map was not clear as we intended, and we apologize. The Cultural Resource Office has worked with us on this clarification for the ambiguity voiced by the Preservation Board in November, involving the 2200 block of Hickory. And we have added since that time the 1000 block of Mississippi as falling into that same needed category change. If the planned development proceeds as discussed on Hickory, this clarification will not affect the site, but would protect further infill developers to follow the historic standards for this neighborhood. We are asking for your acceptance of this clarification, defining historic infill on the map and dividing residential and non-residential construction into 3 developable properties. Thank you all for your help.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, I believe our role in this matter is to decide whether or not to direct the staff to prepare a report making a recommendation to the Planning Commission and to the Board of Aldermen. Is there any commissioner who believes that we should not so direct the staff?
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So I thought that Ms. Sessions was going to answer the question about having talked to the property owners. So I'm interested in the 1001 Mississippi property and
Yes.
what they said.
Yes, I contacted the manager of the building and I talked to her twice. I've sent her all of the drawings that you have seen, plus a description of the change. And she has communicated with me that she understands that and has received them. And she also knew the date of the Preservation Board meeting. So I have not heard back from her at the time. The first time I talked to her, she had no great comment other than the fact she thought that that lot was probably going to be sold, but she did not know any further about it. So that was the contact I had with that. And with Jeff, I've had many conversations through the time about this, about the need for this.
So the 1001 Mississippi is actually that whole, it's one big lot. It's a condominium. So it actually, I mean, that's a
no,
question.
it's not, it's just the lot. It's just the lot south of the condominiums.
Right, but that lot is part of the condominium. If you pull it up, legally speaking, it's one big condominium lot. And so,
yes.
I mean,
yes.
so staff, I don't know how you're going to legally carve out part of one lot and say it's subject to different standards. And actually all of the owners of units there, you know, have a say in it because it's part of their condo association. It's part of their property. They all own a little piece of that lot in undivided interest since it's a condominium. So I just think it's a little odd that we're taking part of a quote lot and applying different standards for it. And I wonder, it doesn't sound like any of the other unit owners there are necessarily were made aware that this was being done to part of their condominium.
It was over 2.5 weeks ago that I contacted the management company and talked to her. And it was, again, a week and a half ago that I called her again and wanted to make sure that she had all the information and did she have any more questions. And I got no answer to that.
Thank you, Suzanne. Barb Burkett, are you present?
Richard, her audio has been having some trouble.
Okay.
Could I say one other thing about
hold on,
as to the question of why this lot and not
Suzanne?
another lot?
Suzanne?
The question that came up just a minute ago was,
The chair is asking you to not speak at this moment.
Hold on just one second. Dan Krasnoff, is there any urgency or clock ticking to do this today?
There is no clock ticking urgency. The way the Lafayette Square standards are written, wherever there was a building located in the neighborhood, it was not placed within one of these categories. So that's why this lot is different, because the neighborhood identified all the developable sites and put them into one category or the other. So, you know, if, God forbid, there were to become another developable site here where the rest of it is all developed with buildings and, you know, and there are townhouses and condominiums. So I don't think it's likely to be redeveloped anytime soon, except for this one lot. I think we'd be pretty confident that the rules applying here would be internally consistent.
I think, in light of a question raised by Commissioner Richardson and our inability to talk to our council because of audio problems, is there anybody who minds us waiting until next meeting to have this clarified? Okay, Dan, let's hear this again next month and get this issue settled, and let's see if we can have our council on audio for the next meeting. Okay, commissioners, thank you. That concludes agendas items A and B. We have a director's report scheduled, and we have requests from the Director of Planning, the 6th Ward Alderwoman, and at least one member of the public to be able to comment on the director's report, anticipating issues that they might like to address. Is there anybody who objects to that? Okay. Members of the public who are present, if you wish to speak on the director's report briefly and succinctly,
Richard?
Yes.
Richard, can we take like a 10-minute recess?
Who asked that question?
Dan Krasnoff did.
Absolutely. We'll be back in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
You know, for the next meeting, we should probably all wear Halloween costumes.
Richard, Barbara can hear us, and she did say that she is fine with deferring.
That she is what?
She is fine with the deferment for next month of the
Great.
Lafayette Square.
Thank you. That proves you don't even have to ask a question to get an answer. Okay, I think we're ready to reconvene. Dan Krasnoff, are you present? It's going to be very hard to have a director's report without a director. There he is.
Here's the director. Mr. Chair, the request is that you please give a call to the planning director, or to me. To me or him.
I will do that immediately after this meeting.
Fair enough. Okay. All right, director's report. All right, Dan. You're Good afternoon, board members. I'm the director, Dan Krasnoff, and this is the director's report. We do this periodically, and I do this as a courtesy for the board to update you on items that you have seen or upcoming events or items that you might see. I would respectfully ask the chair that if there is public comment, I be given the opportunity for a rebuttal to that.
Or applause.
I'm sorry? Or what?
Or applause.
Or applause. Standing ovations are always welcome.
It's never a good sign to back into your report.
All right. On with the show. So I'm going to talk with you all about two items today. These are items that I suspect some of you are already familiar with. And I want to make sure that there's an opportunity for you to understand the decision-making process that took place in my office regarding these items. So the first item is regarding demolitions at 1900 to 12 Olive Street and at 1901 Pine Street. So these items were 6 separate demolition applications submitted regarding the demolition of buildings the public facades of which mostly date from the mid-1920s. They are 1901 Pine Street and 5 buildings whose addresses are between 1900 and 1912 Olive Street. These applications were received on August 12th, and after deliberation, they were approved for demolition on September 9th. What you see here is a map of the soccer stadium redevelopment section of town. Immediately to the east of there, on Olive Street, in a red rectangle, is the site of the buildings proposed for demolition on Olive Street. The building on Pine Street is just across the alley from them. And I think you'll see in a moment or two why I'm mostly talking about the Olive Street buildings today. So this is an image of the buildings in general. We are looking east down Olive Street, and the buildings proposed for demolition and approved for demolition are sort of in the middle of the screen. They're the 2- and 3-story buildings in the middle of the screen. The owner of the property is an LLC named Pitch 314 that is associated with the St. Louis MLS soccer franchise. CRO has review authority because the buildings are located in a preservation review district. None of the buildings are in a National Register district. None of the buildings are within a local district. None of the buildings are locally designated as landmarks. I'd like to give a quick rundown of the review criteria, and then I'd like to talk specifically about a couple of them. Number A, this is not in a redevelopment area. There is a redevelopment plan for the soccer stadium, and then there are related ordinances and redevelopment, community improvement districts, for example, and a TDD on the block immediately adjacent to where these buildings are located. Secondly, some of the buildings are non-contributing buildings, and some of them are qualifying buildings per the ordinance. And I'll go into that in more depth in a moment. All the buildings are sound. The reuse potential of the buildings in my opinion, is limited based on similar type of buildings in the vicinity, and that's the standard the ordinance requires us to use. The urban design of the buildings, they are relatively modest, no pun intended, pedestrian buildings in the downtown core. They are not particularly noteworthy for their architecture or design. The proposed subsequent construction was short-term surface parking with potential long-term structured parking. And finally, under commonly controlled property, Pitch 314 LLC is associated with the soccer franchise in St. Louis. So there is adjacency here per the commonly controlled property aspect of the ordinance. So now I'd like to talk about the buildings and their significance or lack thereof. The buildings you see here are 1901 Pine and 1902-6 Olive Street. I determined that these were non-contributing buildings, and the ordinance really provides no protections for non-contributing buildings. So their approval of those demolitions was relatively straightforward. That leaves us with 4 buildings that were proposed that are not non-contributing. 1900 Olive, which you see on the left on the screen. I'm sorry for the pixelation in the photograph in the middle, but there's two-story kind of arts and crafts style commercial buildings in the middle, and then on the right is a 3-story building that has a very contemporary design and has no historical value in terms of its design, but it does have a presence on the street. So these 4 structures were rated by me as qualifying only because of their contribution to the streetscape. They have no particular historical value that is noteworthy per the ordinance. That's why they are not merit buildings or high merit buildings per the ordinance. I want to talk about sort of what's impacted these buildings historically, because I think it's important. Olive Street was widened between 1926 and about 1930. And the pictures you see here illustrate that. The picture on the left, as a matter of fact, is the site of the soccer stadium where it's being constructed now. That's 21st Street in the foreground. And you can see at 22nd Street, there's the shadow of the building that has not yet been pushed back away from the expanded street as Olive is widened. You can also see where there's construction going on the left of the building that's in question, not in question. That's a building that is getting the treatment that those buildings got on the south side of Olive when the city decided, for better or for worse, to expand the street in the 1920s. The picture on the right is not the area, not the blocks we're reviewing today, but I thought it was illustrative of the conditions that happened with the expansion of the street. So on the right-hand side of that picture is the Missouri Pacific building under construction. That's at about 14th Street and Olive. On the left-hand side is a building that's, I'm sure, long gone, but it is a building that's had the front facade removed, and a new facade will be put on it as the building is pushed back. The new facade will surely not have arched windows or relate architecturally very well to the historic building. At least that's the experience I've seen along Olive, where we see buildings with new front facades that were put on during the 1920s. So, Preservation Board members, you've all been through this drill before. There are 2 requirements when reviewing demolitions in preservation review districts that affect whether the building can be demolished or not. The first is if they're a qualifying or contributing building, and if they are sound, we have to show unusual circumstances to justify demolition. The unusual circumstances here, I think, well, I don't think I know, are the strong amount of cooperation that has taken place between the city and the soccer franchise in the redevelopment of this part of town. There's a cooperation agreement about the redevelopment and reuse of Olive Plaza. There's a significant agreement about reconstructing roadways and sidewalk improvements and site improvements, both in the redevelopment area and around the redevelopment area. And finally, there is language about cooperating on in the redevelopment area on a CID, a community improvement district, and a transit development district that relates to this as well. So before I further unpack that, I just wanted to show these two images. One is the site of the soccer stadium development area today. If you can follow my cursor, you see this long exit ramp off Interstate 6440. That long entrance ramp is being removed, and a great barrier between 18th Street and 22nd Street is going away. In addition, there, as I said, if you look on the right, you can see where the new soccer stadium is being built, where some soccer fields are being built, which will increase public activity. And you can see where there are streetscape improvements planned. The buildings proposed for demolition, I'll show this on the area on the right-hand side with the soccer stadium, are right here. Okay, if everyone can see my arrow. So there's a lot of cooperation between the city and the soccer franchise. Additionally, there's language in the Master Development Agreement for the soccer stadium, Article 2, Section 4, off-site parking. The redeveloper, that would be the soccer franchise, shall cooperate with the authority, the LCRA, to identify potential locations near the redevelopment area for the construction of surface or structured parking facilities. And even though the redevelopment area does not include the block with the red rectangle, which is the block that the building for the demolitions are proposed on, the Community Improvement District does include that area, and it specifically references potential for expansion of parking. So that's why my opinion was there were unusual circumstances that justified the demolition based on the effort to really redefine that part of downtown. Additionally, the ordinance says at least one of the criteria A, D, F, and G in the ordinance must identify demolition as appropriate. So just quickly going through those, the ordinance instructs the director to look at similar blocks in that area of town with similar buildings and evaluate their reuse potential. The block you see on the screen is on the 1700 block of Olive Street. It is an intact block. It is international registered district. It is eligible for tax credits. It is nearly vacant. I take no joy in saying that. I would love to see more development happening here, but at this point, economic conditions are not exactly going gangbusters. The next criteria in the ordinance is under proposed subsequent construction, and usually we think of that as being about new buildings having equal or greater architectural value, but that there is a specific statement about parking lots in that ordinance. And it says, parking lots will be given favorable consideration when directly abutting or adjoining facilities requiring additional off-street parking. The proposal for structured surface parking is for activity at the soccer facility and or displaced parking from the lots on the side of the MLS stadium and conforms to this criterion. And finally, commonly controlled property. I'm not going to read that long statement from the ordinance, but because the soccer franchise essentially owns both the parcels being proposed for demolition and the soccer redevelopment area, the soccer stadium redevelopment area, I also felt there was commonly controlled property as dictated by the ordinance. I'd like to just say a few words about the context of this situation, if I could. So on the screen that you see here, outlined in black, are surface parking spaces that are being removed from our streets or from our city in downtown West for the soccer stadium. On the right, down below rather, you see the red triangle where the red rectangle where the additional parking is going. I think it's a significant trade-off. Do I like surface parking lots? I don't. On the other hand, what we're getting versus what we're losing, I think, is a winning proposition in this case. That and the fact that the developer has said they're also contemplating a parking structure on this site that could have first floor retail. And the other thing I wanted to point out is you see the arrow on the screen here. This is a parking lot that is used by Blue Cross Blue Shield. it is in the soccer footprint. It is still being used today. And parkers from there are being moved onto the block where the demolitions are taking place. So there's a direct relationship between these demolitions and the need to move parking there. And I found that persuasive. Finally, I would just reiterate again what the overall development is getting for downtown West and for the city versus what's being lost with these not historic buildings that only fill up half a block and are relatively undistinguished in design. Here's a rendering of the soccer stadium across 20th Street at Olive, and above you see what until recently was there. Of course, it's all gone now because the soccer stadium is being constructed. And then down below, I will point out, so the buildings being demolished are on the left-hand side, sort of in the middle left of the screen. These blocks are almost all surface parking already. So whether these buildings stay or go is not going to move the needle much in terms of whether this becomes a vibrant pedestrian district or whether these remain about 2 or 3 solid blocks of surface parking. And my hope is that with the increased property value around the stadium from the stadium, that increased property value will make people think there's more money to be made by doing things other than surface parking in the future. And that is the basis upon which those demolitions were approved by my office, by me, I should say by me. The other item, Mr. Chairman, that I have is 201 South Jefferson Avenue. These are a tale of 2 demolitions, I will say.
Before we go on to that, Director, Commissioner Hamilton, have you got a question on that subject? You're muted. Commissioner Colleen, have you got a question or comment?
No, sir.
Commissioner Richardson, question or comment?
Not at this time.
Commissioner Robinson, question or comment? Commissioner Vines, question or comment?
Yes, comment really, and a question potentially. And I'll try not to take too much time, but Dan, I do appreciate the position you're in. I know it's not an enviable place to be, to have to make decisions like this. However, I do think that that's the reason the Preservation Board exists, is to help make the best possible decisions in a tough, contentious situation like this. Overall, my view is that this is a net loss for downtown any way you slice it. There is no lower common denominator than surface parking in downtown, especially amidst a complete, a very heavily promoted new plan for downtown that seeks public input about what makes downtowns vibrant and attractive. I think surface parking in this day and age, replacing usable buildings, is about as the lowest we can go in terms of our standards and civic self-esteem. Inevitably, the real estate values and demand for properties surrounding the new stadium are going to go way up. And so buildings like this that maybe have languished for a long time are going to see renewed demand and interest by parties that want to reinvest in them. I think that's been proven time and again in neighborhoods all over the city and in downtown St. Louis. The point that you made, that you said that it has limited reuse potential, and then you pointed to an adjacent block of similar scale buildings. I don't know what to really think about that. I think that, as I said, I think that, if this is a successful stadium endeavor, I think that those buildings will see some renewed interest. But at the same time, does referencing those other buildings on that other block, does that mean that they're next? Are they sitting ducks too? Or are we waiting for the next parking proposal? And will those buildings be targeted next? Because it seems like we're kind of dismissing their value just because they may have been underutilized for some time now. I think that's a real slippery slope and kind of a dangerous precedent to set. You know, kind of lastly, just to wrap up, and I know there are other people want to speak, but approving this demolition without deferring to the preservation board, whose sole purpose is really to review projects and proposals like this. Considering the fact that you have, you know, you do have the authority to make a decision without preservation review, and I respect that. But you've sent us some proposals before that are far less consequential, and you wanted us to weigh in and review it, you know, objectively in the past. And if this doesn't meet the muster for something that warrants review, I'm not really sure what is. This is the centerpiece of our city, downtown St. Louis, at the crossroads of all the activity that we really need to, you know, see get the vitality that makes a city a city. And here we are still in 2020, tearing down solid, usable urban scale buildings for surface parking in a downtown that is already painfully overparked. And I get that there are political pressures and demands that we have to contend with, but I just feel like to me, it's a little bit hollow to try to defend the indefensible here. And I just really hope that if there's some change we can make to the ordinance that would compel projects like this to automatically be referred to the Preservation Review Board. I think that we need to really take a hard look at doing that, because this is definitely emblematic of, to me, in my opinion, a massive failure of process and good decision making.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners who have previously deferred comment, are there any comments among commissioners on this subject? Okay, Mr. Director, please continue.
So I will continue on 201 South Jefferson. I will note, Mr. Chairman, that Alderwoman Ingracia asked to speak, but why don't I do this first and then we can deal with that? Okay.
My thought was to allow your report to commissioners to be commented on by commissioners first. We have 4 people who have asked to speak, and we'll do that immediately after you complete your report, if it happens in this calendar day.
Okay. All right. This one's a quicker report. 201 South Jefferson Avenue demolition. This is a demolition application for a mid-century modern commercial building in the Midtown neighborhood, actually. The application was received by our office on August 4th, and I approved the demolition on September 21st. This is an aerial view showing the location of the building. The image on the left shows Highway 6440 down at the bottom of the screen. Jefferson Avenue running north bisects sort of the screen. Market Street running east and west is the next arterial road north of I-6440. Between them, you'll see a red rectangle on the left and the right. That red rectangle is the location of the building we're discussing today, or at this moment, 201 South Jefferson. Here's a picture of the front of the building. As I said, it's a mid-century modern building. It is characterized by having a low-slung architectural presence. It is made of buff brick and mostly floor-to-ceiling glass. It is, I do not think, an exceptionally designed building, but it is solidly within the architectural vocabulary of mid-century modern design. And it was built in the, I believe, in the early 1960s. I apologize for the fuzziness of this screen. This is an excerpt from the St. Louis Modern Study that this office got a grant to do to study commercial mid-century modern architecture in St. Louis. The consultant identified a couple areas in town where they thought there were enough concentrations of mid-century modern buildings that there might be enough fabric to justify something like a National Register nomination. Those are the buildings in red here. Most people might not realize that Park Street extends all the way west of Jefferson over to Spring Avenue. And you've got most of these buildings along the spine of Park Street, but you do have 4 of them, including the building in question today at the top, at the northern end, that are on Jefferson Avenue. So here's the context on Jefferson Avenue. The building immediately south of the building at 201 South Jefferson is 211 South Jefferson, which is owned by a cleaning company. Down the street, in the background on the screen on the right and the foreground of the screen on the left is Orbital Engineering. And beyond that is another mid-century modern building, and those both form the corner of Clark Street. This is going to the north from the mid-century modern building at 201 South Jefferson. This is a large surface parking lot for Wells Fargo Advisors, and you see their complex off in the distance there on the other side of Market Street. This building has been owned by the Missouri Real Estate Insurance Agency since 2010. This entity has owned the building since 2010. CRO's review authority because it is located like the other buildings in the Preservation Review District. I'd like to briefly go through the criteria. It is not called for demolition and redevelopment plan. Unlike the other buildings, it is a merit building. It has been identified as a potential National Register structure as part of a potential district, and therefore a merit building. And it is designated so in the decision letter that our office, that I generated. It is found for the ordinance. It'll stand for 6 months. Regarding the use potential, nearby buildings are occupied. This building had been vacant for 4 years. And per legal advice that I received, the owner has suffered an economic hardship, and I'll come back to that in a minute. In terms of urban design, it's an auto-oriented design, which is usually not something that preservationists like, but in this particular case, it's mid-century design. It's got a nice little front yard, as you grass, which most of mid-century modern buildings do in this neck of the woods. The proposed subsequent construction is a Starbucks coffee shop, and there is not commonly controlled property. As I said in the previous presentation, there are 2 standards that must be met to get a demolition permit. One is there has to be unusual circumstances to support demolition of the building, and criteria A, D, F, or G must indicate as appropriate. So what are the unusual circumstances here? Because I've already told you I approved the permit. The unusual circumstances go to process in this case. An application was applied by the owner for a building permit before a demolition permit. The building permit was granted. The applicant then applied for a demolition permit. The applicant made financial commitments to Starbucks based on their approval of their building permit. They were surprised when they found out they would have difficulty getting a demolition permit because it's a merit building and the criteria apply. I received advice from the city councilor that the financial commitment constituted an economic hardship for the owner. So the economic hardship is both the unusual circumstance and the component of criterion D3, which is economic hardship. And finally, the fact that the building has been vacant for 4 years makes its reuse potential at least in some ways questionable. So with great reluctance and frustration, I approved that demolition permit. I'm not happy about it. I think it's important we get process right. I've had a lot of conversation with the building commissioner since then about how we do that better. And I hate to lose this building, but I hope we learn from this mistake and don't have this happen again. And that concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to take questions, or I would like the opportunity to respond to others' thoughts, Mr. Chairman, if you would.
Commissioner Hamilton, have you got questions or comments?
No.
Commissioner Killeen, questions or comments?
No.
Commissioner Richardson, question or comments?
No.
Commissioner Robinson, question or comments? Commissioner Vines, continue.
No, I don't have any. I think I said what I needed to before.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, 4 people have asked if they can comment on the director's report, beginning with the Planning Commissioner. Mr. Rowe, are you still present? Okay, Alderwoman Ingracia, are you still present? Christine?
Yes, am I okay to comment?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much, Chairman. Shame on all of you for not being more willing to take on what is obviously very important to the community, and which I know it's a volunteer position, but you've been tasked to do. The public relies on you when there is a set of circumstances, especially political circumstances, that can't be worked out. And you just all deflected, aside from Commissioner Vines, you all just deflected your position by voting the way that you did. I just want to make sure that you are all here for the right purposes. St. Louis City is extremely uniquely situated with the incredible architecture that we have. And I'm not saying it's my job, because I'm not an expert, to rule for or against demolition. But the reason that we have all of you appointed is to protect us from doing things that we should not be doing. And you're allowing the director and the planning commission and the planning director to get out of their jobs without asking not even one difficult question. Man, like, how sorry of a system do we have? So I would love to take questions from you if you have them, but please know that you will be receiving directives from the Board of Aldermen soon on how we should handle these types of situations, to make sure that the public is allowed to have a say and weigh in. And that being said, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to leave the meeting today without asking if you have questions of me or concerns that I can address. So if it's appropriate, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take questions of the board.
Let me ask the first one. To what vote of ours are you referring?
I'm referring to I guess the lack of interest that I see here on the director's report. So no vote with specificity, but the lack of questions on the director's report.
Fair point. Commissioners, further questions?
I'd like to comment on that if I could. This is Mike Killeen. Am I heard there?
Yes, sir.
With all due respect to the aldermen, to shame on us, I would think it's maybe shame on the Board of Aldermen for allowing this type of decision to be made by the director without him having to come to us. This demolition, the information about this was brought to us after it was approved. We had no vote. Had we had a vote, I think things may have gone differently, but we were not given a vote. So I'm frankly insulted by what the aldermans just said about myself and my fellow committee members here. And I think that we need to do something about this, just as Mr. Vine said, to get this changed. But the ship has already sailed. For us to chastise Mr. Krasnoff for his decision at this time, I think is a moot point. I've talked to him directly, and I just, frankly, am a little astonished by the comments by the alderman woman. Thank you.
I have a comment. Let me say this. I think the comment that was just stated and made was kind of reckless, that none of us care that are on this board. We take hours out of our day every month to come everyone on this board is thoughtful. They ask great questions, maybe not for the case you were referring to, whatever you were referring to, but I take great insult because sometimes we're on these meetings for 4 or 5 hours, and to come on and say that none of us care is just plain insulting, and just disgusted by that comment. That's all.
I second Commissioner Hamilton's remarks. And I've been on the board. This is Commissioner Anthony Robinson, and I have been on the board since 2003. And I am very passionate about what we do.
Mr. Richardson, I also take issue with the comments and would note that we didn't get a chance to vote or rule on this. It was already, decision was already made. Having said that, you know, I did, while we're on this, take a look at the ordinance, and I think, you know, Director Krasnoff, it would benefit us if our attorney and yourself, if we could maybe do an audit of our ordinance, our enabling legislation, and make sure we know what powers we do have and what powers we can delegate. But I'm reading something, I feel slightly culpable here as a board member, that it says the Preservation Board may, by a duly adopted order or regulation consistent with this chapter, authorize the CRO office to make reviews of demolition permit applications. Decisions, and so I think we have in the past allowed the CRO office to approve demolitions in preservation review districts. And so you did that consistent with that past practice. But if we as a board want to rein in or change or limit or restrict that somehow going forward, so that we want a greater say in some of these reviews, I think we have that power perhaps. And so I guess I would encourage, maybe at one of our future board meetings, we could have a report from our attorney as to, and a discussion as a board of whether we want to have more input into preservation review demolition decisions, but with the caveat or the one comment that, as Commissioner Hamilton said, sometimes we have 4-hour meetings, so those meetings might turn into 5 hours now. So that's all I have to say.
And we're doing it because we all have passion for this. So I'm sorry, that comment was crazy. Let me on the record, that comment was crazy.
Any further comments from commissioners?
Yeah, further, we're not paid. Some of the other volunteer, quote unquote, commissioners do get paid a little bit for their time. We've been doing this for free for years. So just astonished at that comment.
Okay, one more citizen has asked to speak. Mr. Bose, are you still here?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Proceed.
Thank you.
Carefully.
Yeah. So I'm the one who dutifully looks through the building and demo permits database that the assessor's office, or no, the building permits folks post on the website. So I thank them for the transparency there. I tried to sound the alarm on this. Of course, a lot of us have been very disappointed at the possibility of these buildings being demoed, and of course now it's underway after all the good vibes you're getting from the stadium, that the expectation would be that these buildings would be brought back to life. So, I mean, Randy pretty much said everything I would wanted to, but I'll just say it's interesting bringing up the widening of Olive. So it's like a spreading disease, the auto orientation of our city, and it's still growing 100 years later. And I guess we need to engage our aldermen to change the policy that should be pointing in the other direction. And sorry Don Rowe isn't on, but I know the draft neighborhood plan for downtown didn't show this block as surface parking. So, I mean, the community was almost officially saying we don't want this to be a surface lot. So I guess we need to engage our policymakers to do different in the future. I guess I don't have a comment for the director. It sounds like he's trying to do his job best he can, but I don't know, it might be too much for the board to deal with if, say, the policy was a building over X years old gets reviewed, because then you might end up with a ton, but we got to do something. Thank you.
This is Andrew Weil, if anyone can hear me.
Yes, Andrew.
I received confirmation that I'd be allowed to speak, and I just heard that that was the last speaker, so I just wanted to announce myself that I'm here, and I'd like to voice my opinion. I've been here since 2:45 as requested.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't fault Dan for his rulings on these matters. I think Dan is a thoughtful person, and I think he does a good job. Frankly, I fault the ordinances, and while unfortunately I think that we may have some lost causes here with the specifics of the buildings that we're discussing, I think that there is an opportunity to treat these buildings essentially as martyrs, and to use their loss as a catalyst for some specific changes to our preservation ordinances. And it sounds to me like there is some interest within the preservation board, who I respect very deeply. I respect your service and your commitment to St. Louis, but also some interest in this within the Board of Aldermen, and perhaps the mayor's office as well. I think we can always improve upon our legislation. That's why we have legislators. We have to address the current situation, and not the situation of the past, of decades ago, when our preservation ordinances were written. I'm sorry, can you all hear me? I'm not sure if I'm coming through.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm sorry, what was that?
That wasn't us.
Oh, okay. I do think that I think that the demolition on Jefferson is unnecessary. I think that building could easily be adapted for us. I mean, it's going to be a Starbucks, right? It looks like a Starbucks already, and it was identified as a significant building by a survey of mid-century architecture that the city paid for, and actually shipped tens of thousands of city dollars out of here to the East Coast to have that survey done. So it's basically said, well, let's identify buildings we should preserve, let's pay for it, and then now let's just demolish it for a Starbucks. But I'm more concerned about the demolitions in the downtown west area. I really think that is an example of a continuation of 1960s era thinking, where we're creating more asphalt, and then we go back and we say, well, these buildings are vacant right now, and the reason they're vacant is because there's asphalt all around. Nobody wants to be there. But the vision should be looking forward. It should be looking at what we can do, and what the MLS Stadium, which incidentally myself and our organization, Landmarks Association, is very, very supportive of that. I spent an hour on the phone with legal counsel for MLS just the other day, and we were totally on the same page in terms of the vision that we have for what the stadium can do for downtown St. Louis. I think it's fabulous. I just think that I would have liked to have seen some more transparency, and that has to come through reform of ordinances. Again, I don't fault the Cultural Resources Office, but I'd like, you know, people were calling me and emailing me and saying, well, why didn't you do anything about this? And my answer was, I didn't know about this. I didn't know it was approved in-house. It didn't come before the board, the appointed board, all of you, respected commissioners. So it was just sort of like happened. And just in summary, my vision, my hope, and I think my organization, speaking on behalf of my organization, and I think speaking on behalf of, if I understand your positions, is that everyone wants to see a vibrant, walkable, interesting, mixed use, exciting stadium community down there. We're all excited about MLS, I think, but you know, if you've got some new buildings that can be redeveloped on the surface parking lots that already exist there, and combine them with the surviving historic environment, then you've got a real unique, real St. Louis place. But these demolitions to me, and I know it's a fait accompli, unfortunately, but I just don't want to see it happen again, because I really want to see the full realization of a unique MLS St. Louis neighborhood. And I hope I haven't dropped off, and I hope I haven't run on too long, but that's my position. Thank you for listening.
Nope, we heard you. Alderwoman Ingracia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clear up what I meant. I apologize. I am so grateful for everyone who's volunteering on the commission. What I was trying to convey is that I believe demos should have been sent, both of these demolition propositions should have been sent to the preservation board. And my intention is to make sure this doesn't happen again. And I apologize if anyone seemed to think I meant something else. I'm disappointed in the process in the Cultural Resources Office and in the mayor's office. I am not disappointed in the board that is serving. I think the board that is serving is definitely working in the best interest of all of us. So I apologize for making it seem unclear about what I was supportive or oppositional about.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Commissioner Rowe, are you back yet? Director Rowe, are you back yet? He is.
Good afternoon. I just sat in the seat that Dan was in, so it's a very, very hot seat. That's how the afternoon has gone on. It's Friday afternoon. I do want to make a couple of comments. Number one is the Preservation Board is one of the most thorough and thoughtful boards in the city. It's a dedicated board that works without any pay. And it's one of the three boards in the city that I know of that meet late in the afternoon and often goes on late in the evening. That is because there are elements that come to the Preservation Board that have a public hearing and people come to, and there are ones that are not. But it's a tremendously responsible board to community interests, to the individual knowledge of each of the Preservation Board members. So I applaud them. I made a mention that I just sat in a seat that's very hot, partly because I want to tell the world that the Cultural Resources Office, and Dan Krasnoff in particular, has a very, very tough job in the city of St. Louis. We are regulators. We are often telling people things that they don't want to know. We don't have money to give, but we do follow process very well. And Dan is exemplary at being a professional in doing that. He has. As we think about our city as a whole, the land area is 62 square miles. There's a lot of areas of town that are in historic districts. There's many that are, much of the city is not in a historic district. And some of those areas are in preservation reduced districts. So there's a different layer of regulations per those different districts. This is true, is reflective of the characteristics of those districts, and is a scale that is different between them in terms of how they're regulated. So I'm saying that in a whole package that we have in the western part of downtown where the stadium is going, a big hole that's about ready to be filled over much construction for a pretty spectacularly architecturally designed, pedestrian-oriented anchor to that part of town. It may have stimulus that we have yet to see that will be there. So we are thinking about and looking at the future. And I do think that as we think about this, not every part of town is equal. Not every regulation has to be exactly administered the same. And if there's a look at some of those, let's just remember that there will be a triage, if you will, of what is done at a staff level and what goes to a board level, partly because the volume is huge, but also as we look at the difference in our classifications of whether something's in a historic district or in some other district, what the appropriate process is. And I'm pleased that there is this discussion today, but let's remember it's a big city with lots of different characteristics, and be mindful of that as we look ahead and look forward. Thank you all.
Thank you, Director. Commissioners, I see no other business before us. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seeing no objection, we stand adjourned. Commissioners, thank you for your time.
See you next month.
Yeah. Bye. Good weekend.
In the movies, when all the microphones off, they yell out clear.